Welcome back. Welcome back to Uncaged Leaders. I'm your host, Mariquita Solis, the Uncaged Heart Coach. This show is dedicated to the successful man who, on paper, has it all: the career, the house, the financial security, but who knows deep down inside he's fighting a soul war. He's ready to end the hollow silence of the man box and finally build a life of genuine courage, purpose, and authenticity. So I bring a unique approach as a female, built on years of training from the Institute for Women Centered Coaching, Training, and Leadership. This is combined with my direct social work experience with little boys shutting down their feelings. And this gives me insight into the moment, the exact moment when little boys shut down and how it affects the successful, driven men of today to build these walls that shut them off from others in relationships. So, I am an empath and a highly sensitive coach. And I help men reconnect with those very things that they've shut down: their vulnerability, their softness, their compassion, and their somatic system. So, thanks for joining us again today. We have a wonderful guest and my friend whose life story is the ultimate example of this profound transformation. Anthony Martinez is a veteran DJ and a proud Nuyorican who moved from the constraints of addiction, incarceration, and the demands of machismo to a life dedicated to service, compassion, and healing through music. Anthony's path reflects the journey from control and toughness to true resilience and emotional freedom. He is now an advocate for men using conscious dance and community support in Puerto Rico to help men reclaim a healthier, more authentic version of themselves. So, we're going to explore how Anthony shattered the rules of the old life to find his new purpose and how he turned deep core wounds into a mission of connectedness. So, before we start, if you're a successful man ready to stop shrinking into silence and finally come home to yourself, I have two ways to help you. I want to invite you to the Uncaged Circle, which is a free bi-monthly virtual event every other Tuesday, the first and the third Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we talk about these topics. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and small group coaching to shift out of these toxic ways of being that suppress who you are and to bring you back into your authentic self. So if you'll check out my website at uncaged-heart.com, you can look and see the Uncaged Circles and the other offerings, because we are meant to shine, and that's what we're about to do now. So thank you. Well, thank you, Anthony, for coming here. Welcome to Uncaged Leaders. So,
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
well, I'm excited to talk to you today. I don't know how long I've known you, for a few years. So this has been long in the making, this conversation. So let's talk about what it's like, the machismo society. I mean, the machismo element in your life, and being growing up in New York, and your background in this in the life in the streets, having to live in that element of society, which was much different from mine. I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, very sheltered environment. I didn't have much pressure on me, and as a little girl, or I didn't have any pressure in the machismo at all, right? So I'm really interested in hearing about this. And how did the pressure of that machismo manifest in your early years? And what specific emotions were you forced to suppress, and that weren't allowed as a little boy in your young environment, in your environment?
Yeah. So, there's two. I had like two different lifestyles, right? So there was my home, my home life, which was, as loving as it could be. I had both my parents in my life, my mom and my dad. Um, my dad was a very hardworking man. My mom was a very hardworking woman. They sent me to private schools all my life. So I had, but I grew up in the mean streets, right? What they call the mean streets of New York, in the ghetto in Brooklyn. But I went to private school. So I had, like a wonderful school life, but I brought the elements of the street wherever I went. And yeah, when I got home, I was also, led like, very sheltered. My parents didn't, they tried to do everything that they could to keep me on track, to keep me out of trouble. But I managed the way, one way or another, I managed my way into trouble. Basically, at home, my dad was a wonderful man. I mean, he was the, my mom was the rock, but my dad was like that foundation as well. He taught me how to show up, work hard for what you had. But he wasn't, emotionally, he wasn't there. He wasn't very present. And so, what I'm looking back now is that, yeah, I was looking for, validation, externally, and looking, at other men. And, those men came in the form of friends, older people that I had met, that were, that didn't have the background that I had, and got themselves into a lot of trouble. And so I gravitated towards that. It was, for me, in the lifestyle that I led outside of home and outside of school was, anger was encouraged, right? Violence was justified. Accountability was suppressed. It's just, for me, machismo was being destructive to everything around me. You didn't question it.
When did you learn
Invested.
that? Like, what age did you learn that, or start to
I
be
was,
aware of that?
I would say, I would say immediately once I was like in school, like once I started to be around other boys, and then when I was hanging out in the streets, yeah, I would say around 6, 7, 8, you just, yeah, you just start learning, like, you start seeing people fighting, you start seeing like what it's like to be, uh, unhealthy masculine, just have that unhealthy masculine energy where it's, instead of being a leader, it was more like domination. Like today, leadership to me is leading with grace and compassion. Back in that time, it was more like, I'll beat your ass if you don't listen to me. That was the kind of, leadership that I had growing up.
And were you scared as a little boy? I mean, did you feel trapped? And did you think, I want to get out of there? Or is there someone that can help me here? Or did you just accept it?
Well, like I said, it's machismo is something that you don't question. You just kind of invest in it, and it generally doesn't, end well. But of course, yeah, machismo is about fear, in my opinion. It is about not being able to, not having that outlet to be emotionally healthy. And so it manifests, when you don't have, this is my story, this is how I saw it. I didn't have a place to express myself emotionally. And so that what I believe happened is that it manifested in self-destructive behavior. We could talk about, the drug part. We can talk about the constant, seeking of attention or validation. Those things lead you down the wrong path if you don't have a healthy, like I had a healthy relationship with my dad, but there wasn't a healthy emotional relationship. So I didn't know where to turn for that type of stuff. And I didn't think that you needed to turn anywhere for that type of stuff. What I saw, what I learned was that the more you zipped your lip, the better it was. If you didn't want to show vulnerability, you didn't want to show any type of emotion that was what I would deem positive, because people would, immediately think you're weak, and they would take advantage of you. And so it was a defense mechanism, kind of keep myself away from connecting with anyone on an emotional level. And yeah, that's basically it.
Wow. Well, I see another leader is here, Yafa. Thanks for watching. She's in leadership at our church. So wonderful. And so, what about your mother? Where was she in this? Was she very like a nurturing mother when you were a little boy?
Yeah, I would say a bit too much. She smothered me. And today I understand. I accept what that was. My mom. Yeah, I mean, in those days, or even today, I mean, it's still reality today. The Latino and Black men. It's we're in danger constantly because we're the ones that fill up most of the prison system. We have high rates of suicide. We have high rates of violence in our community. So my mom was very protective. She knew that. She wasn't, she had escaped from her own trauma, as a girl coming up with a lot of, you know, she dealt with a lot of machismo where she wasn't really allowed to even have an education. She stayed around the house and did the chores and took care of her brothers. My mom didn't have a very loving relationship, in terms of, she didn't have a good, healthy, masculine role model in her life. And so I think she overcompensated, right? She wanted to keep her only son alive and healthy. And so that's what they did. She definitely, she took me to school. My mom took me to school until I graduated high school. My mom would have still taken me to school if I would have stayed at home in college. I had to go away to college in order for her to stop, being there for me, which, now today I honor that. But back in that time, I wanted to get away from her because I felt like I couldn't lead my own life. But, again, I honor her because, she was trying to protect her son from a world that she probably knew was not a good place for me to be in. So yeah, my parents were always in my life until recently when my mom passed.
Mm, yeah. It sounds like she really loved you. So, yeah. So, your childhood involved was very intense environment of the addiction and incarceration. So, can you talk a little bit about the internal prison that you had to build for yourself through secrecy and the man box, and not being able to cry, not being able to show feelings, and what was the ultimate cost of living like that and maintaining that facade?
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so we had some rules, right? We had some rules in my upbringing. They call them like codes, badges of honor. Today, in seeking a more healthy masculine energy, we call them rites of passage. But my rites of passage growing up were, we had, I'd say about five. I could name about five. One was having several intimate partners, having a bunch of girlfriends. And for some, having a lot of baby mamas, right? Having a nice car with the sound system and rims, that was big. If you had a dog, it had to be like a badass dog, like a Rottweiler, Pit Bull, German Shepherd, Doberman. The fourth one was drink and do drugs. And the fifth one was generally, right, don't show signs of weakness, right? And back then it was, there were words that defined what that meant, right? Which I prefer not to reiterate. And yeah, I mean, the cost of following all these rules was incarceration and near death. Because, what I'm learning today is that when you're out of alignment, when you're not living your truth, or you have no values, you're not connected to your values. I had to learn values. I had to do deep work to learn what values even are. And, when you live a life out of alignment, we, as men, I'll keep it on myself, me personally, I went down some really interesting paths. One led me to prison. The other one led me to, near suicide, because I was drugging myself to death, basically. Fortunately, my mom and dad, didn't give up on me. They stayed there, and they didn't judge. They just kept, showing me love how they saw fit, right? Yeah, and I think at that time, what I remember mainly was what kept me from not ending it all was my dad's legacy. There's this hidden guilt of wow, this is what I've become. What's my dad gonna think? What are people gonna think, right, of Frankie's son? And there was a lot of shame around that, and to be honest, that stuff kept me alive, because there was always this in the back of my mind. I was like, I need to get through this for my dad. And today, I know that I do this for myself. I don't live anyone's life anymore. I don't live anyone else's truth. I discovered my truth, and now I live it to the best of my ability.
What's it like to live when you're not living in alignment with who you are? What does that feel like inside?
I could tell you it manifests physically. And I would argue that that's probably why I did what I was doing. The drugs and the pain and suffering that I inflicted on myself. Because I have to be honest. I'm responsible. I have a responsibility in all this. It's not because I'm Puerto Rican. It's not because I was, I grew up in the ghetto. I made these choices. And today I hold myself accountable for all my choices and all my decisions. Yeah, when you're out of alignment, it feels like your heart, like a cinder block is on your chest. Living out of alignment is making decisions that are not, within your core values. It's, you're living a lie. You have a mask that you don't take off.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. All right. So right now, your current work is so different. I mean, you're promoting veganism and compassion through Casa Vegana, and that is so different from your past associated with dog fighting. So, can you describe the first moment of intense self accountability when you confronted the cruelty of the past actions that were part of your life, and how that confrontation became became necessary for your path of healing?
Yeah, so it was during my vegan transition, right? I was a bit resistant, right? And I made, I was involved in all types of mental gymnastics to continue eating animals, until one day my buddy who was helping me transition, who turned me on to the lifestyle, just kind of called me out and said, I think it's time for you to visit the animals that you call food. and he took me to a sanctuary, and that's where I met the goat that changed my life. Um, he was the first one that greeted me when I set foot into the sanctuary, and I'll never forget the day. He bumped me with his head like goats do, and looked at me, and that was it. I basically fell apart in tears and emotions, and that was the turning point for me, where I literally made a promise to that goat that I would do everything I can to redefine love and compassion for all sentient beings in and leading a lifestyle that we call veganism. um, and to go back to to dog fighting, during my time in that world, I knew in my heart I was hurting animals. I had house dogs. I had
Mm.
dogs that I would come home to and feed and love and walk and enjoy my time with. Um, but at that time, you're surrounded by so many people that justified those actions. It became your reality. It supported a belief system that I was deeply entrenched in. So I kept doing it because it was I had people supporting me. Um, yeah, I mean, to me, jail saved my life. I mean, it was the universe's way of hitting that pause button. Because had I kept going, I have no doubt in my mind that I would be dead, because I was going down a really deep, dark path. Um, and it was only being incarcerated that helped me pause. And even though after I got out of jail, I didn't continue down that path, I turned down another dark path. But that was the next lesson that I needed to go through in this life. Um, Both, I see as as you know the parts of my life that defined who I am today. I Did it suck? Yeah, sure, it sucked. But to be honest, I'm grateful because it made me the person that I am today. It made me go deep. I was lost. I was not living my truth, and that's just some people have different paths. My path was a little rougher than most, and that's okay. It's okay. Today I accept that, and I embrace it. I do embrace it because it's helpful for me to get, or it's also helpful for me, like to resonate with some of the men that I run into today that have been through all, and there's a lot. Our rates are sky high for incarceration, suicide, violence. I mean, it's you know we're in a very interesting time, as men, and part of this work is starting to uplift the consciousness, um, which I feel it's time. You know, uh, there's not very many spaces for us, but they exist and they're starting to grow, and that's where I see the healing. That's where I believe, um, it's actually it's a start. It's the start that we need, so we can get back to being being and having healthy male role models in society.
We have to have that. Something has to change because suppressing who we are, I mean, for men and women to suppress who they are, it's like you're saying, living out of alignment. That's a hollow way to live. And like you said, like a cinder block on your chest. And yes, suppressing every the core of your being. So things have to change. So when you gain this new perspective on life, beyond the physical incarceration, was there a specific resource or a book or a person during that period that provided you like a glimpse of hope and started you on a path to reclaim that self-worth that you had lost?
Yeah, I mean, my dad uh, was always a constant in my life. He didn't flinch at all during, my incarceration. When I transitioned to vegan, you know, he he still was there for me. He still uh, was present. Even though he didn't know how to be present, right? But that's okay. I didn't know either, and he didn't have the resources that I have today. So we I accept him today for what he stood for in my life. He was a solid male role model that I needed to have at that time in my life, because he was there. That was, to me, probably the biggest hurdle, right? And I believe it's a big hurdle for a lot of men today, is being daddy deprived. That's a big deal. And for me, having a dad in my life kept me out of a lot more trouble than I probably could have gotten into. Um, today my relationship is a lot better, stronger than ever before. I mean, I tell him I love him. Um, I tell him I miss him. I say things to him that I never said before, that he's never said to me. And when we lost, when he lost his wife, I lost my mom. We spent a lot of time together, and he was in a lot of pain, and I was able to hold that space for him, during one of his most challenging times ever. I mean, he was with my mom for 55 years. I mean, it was a very big deal. And like most men of his time, he didn't know how to take care of himself, physically or emotionally. He didn't know how to cook. He didn't know how to do anything. My mom did everything. So it was like a relearning for him and for me to be the son that be a good son. It gave me an opportunity to be that for him and take care of him and teach him some of the basics, like, hey, this is how you make rice. Hey, this is how you dress yourself. Like, hey, you don't want to wear this type of stuff. No, you don't always have to build something or fix something. Like, you just need to relax. You need to show yourself some grace and some compassion and stop doing things. Because something that I run into a lot with the men's work that I do is that we constantly we tie our identities to how much we get done. And a lot of the times for me, I always end up in what I didn't get done. So I identify with what I didn't get done, and then I beat myself up. So it becomes like this cycle of, like, that we see a lot in many of the men that I see. And I learn from them, because they remind me, hey, show some grace. So, let's celebrate our wins, and not I have a list of 100 things to do. Let's talk about the 10 things I did, and not the 90 that I didn't do. And then maybe reduce that list, because you're not a robot, and you need to, sometimes you need to take a break and show yourself some self-love. And those are things that I'm learning now. I'm 53. I just turned 53. And I didn't know how to take care of myself. That's all new to me. Past 5 years has been all new to me. Breath work, meditation, exercise, or just saying no and stopping. Those two things are like key tools that I have in my life that as a man helped me to move forward in a more positive way.
That is so interesting because recently I was talking to a man who said, no, we can't stop. We can't pause. And I'm thinking, how can we not stop and pause? We're human beings. I mean, that's part of life, but that's the man box. You got to keep going. You got to keep going. You got to keep going because you can't ever show like, oh, I've got to take a break because that means I'm weak.
Yeah, it's ingrained. I mean, that's what they tell us. We get. I mean, I'll keep it on myself, but I mean, I was always, because of my dad, right? Because he was always there, but he was, but when he wasn't there, he was working. He wasn't at home most of the time. He worked at night, and then he slept during the day. But before he even went to go to bed, or when he went to go to sleep during the day, he would work as a superintendent. So he would come home from a union job. Sometimes I would see him go when I went to school, right? And then he would work most of the day and then he would sleep. So when I got home, he would be sleeping until he woke up, and then we had dinner together. That was key. That was the one thing I learned from my dad, right? Without fail, he was there for dinner. We sat as a family, the three of us, without fail. But it had consequences because the man didn't sleep. He was, he was an emotional and physical wreck. Now he's suffering from all types. He's had like about 30 surgeries. Yeah, and this is, I don't want to generalize, but this is the majority of men go through this because we just keep moving and we have to pause. It's harmful. We have to take a pause. We have to slow down the brain. We have to love ourselves. Loving yourself doesn't mean that you're working 18 hours and then not getting rest or eating well or spending time with your family. Those, to me, that's the beauty of life is enjoying it.
Yeah, you're right. And you're going to miss out if you don't ever stop. Yes, I hope everyone is listening and wow, it's something to really think about and your body will let you know when you are overwhelmed. So listen to your body and take that pause. So gosh. All right, well, let's talk about this. When you were in prison, right? That was a very hyper masculine environment. This ultimate test of survival because of who you were surrounded with in that environment. And there's a quote that someone told me recently about a man in prison, a young man, and he said how much he loved his girlfriend's softness. He said, I love my girlfriend's softness, but I never want her to know that. So, given your journey, what is it about the prison environment and the internal emotional rules that you had to follow that makes vulnerability, softness, appreciation feel like this, like a lethal weakness that you have to hide from? I mean, you can't show that to people, even to the person that you love.
Yeah, I mean, jail definitely did a number on me, emotionally. Yeah, I was scared shitless, to be honest. Excuse my French. I was scared. I wanted to get out. I didn't want to be there. There was times where I wanted to cry and I couldn't.
What would happen if you cried? I mean, that was it. They would get you. I mean, would they be?
Yeah. Yeah, that was very frowned upon. Crying and I missed my mom. I missed being at home. I missed being free. And I didn't spend, I didn't do like what they call hard time. I didn't spend years in jail. It was 78 days.
Uh-huh.
But it was pretty crappy. Um, you had to be very hard. You had to be, you know, I remember, the first day I was in, um, I was tested. You know, they, the other inmates, when it comes time for the food, it's general, from what I understand, but my lived experience was that they're going to test you. They're going to take your food. You're going to stand around and you're going to look around and you're going to be like, oh, where's my tray? And the person that delivers, you'll look for the guard, right? Because you're going to, there's a lot of confusion. I'm like, why didn't I get a tray? So you look for the guard and I'm like, hey, where's my tray? And they'll be like, we don't know. We bring a tray for everybody. It's in here somewhere. You figure it out. And that's the test. Then you have to figure out who took your tray and you have to confront them, regardless of how you feel. I was scared. Even coming from like this tough, machismo upbringing in the streets, it's a whole different ball game when you're in jail, because you don't know who's in there. You don't know what level of, you don't know where they are on their journey. So, to give you a quick rundown of what's the difference between jail and prison, jail, they stick everybody in jail. So you could be in there with a murderer, rapists, blue collar criminals, somebody who just doesn't pay alimony, someone who sold drugs. It doesn't matter. And so jail is they keep you in there until you go to trial, and then you go to prison. Prison is long time. Now that's when they separate you, so that you know what you're getting. You know what environment you're going to be in. Generally, they put different types of crimes. They put you in different types of environment in prison. They don't do that in jail. So there's like this shroud of uncertainty that you live in jail. And it was tough. It was, I had to shut down. I had to shut down a lot of my emotions and overcompensate, the ones that were unhealthy. It got to for me, it got to a point, you're always being tested. You're always, in jail, it's a constant test. You're playing cards, people are fighting for resources. It's like, if you're playing cards, you gotta win. If you lose your resources, because we don't just play cards. We play cards for commissary, for, milk, or for, dinner. If I beat you in cards, I get your dinner. That's how it worked. And, it's pretty brutal. It's this constant, you constantly have to rise up to the occasion. And some days I didn't want to. Some days I just wanted to be hugged. Some days I just wanted to just be in my own bed. And it just was not possible. So you just had to keep the mask on. At one point, I had to do something which I generally never, would have liked to have participated in. The codes in my upbringing is, you don't fight unless you defend yourself, right? I don't put my hands on anyone unless it's to defend myself, or I felt like I was in danger. And in jail, I had to put my hands on my cellmate, because, like I explained, in jail, you don't know what people are convicted for until they get convicted. My cellmate told us he was in for manslaughter. Until the day that he went to trial, he came back to his cell. The next morning, the inmates had the paper. They yanked me out of my cell, and they accused me of knowing that this man was a pedophile. He was convicted of molesting young boys. And I had to make a decision based on life or death. They thought I knew. They thought I had, I mean, just because they thought I knew, or like so how it worked was, if I knew that he was a pedophile, I should have done something about it. Might equals right. So them telling me, well, you should have known. Well, because you knew and didn't say nothing, now we're going to beat you up just like we're going to beat him up. So I had to just make a decision. Either I beat him up or I was going to get beat up. And the guards knew this. And, but this is generally, from my understanding, this is what happens with pedophiles in jail. They, people really frown upon that in the jail system. And so they have that, I forget what it's like. It's like he got what he deserved, and then they take him once the inmates are done with him, then they ship him off to prison, and then he has to live another hell in that regard. But at the end of the day, he didn't need a beating. He needed help. He needed healing from whatever trauma he experienced as a boy. So, it was another instance of me having to not live in alignment, because I would have never, I would never, even as much as I pedophilia is horrible, but they don't deserve a beating. No one deserves violence inflicted upon them. I mean, that's not the answer.
Right. What does violence do? Nothing. I mean, nothing. How does that heal? It doesn't.
No, it just, it creates more violence, because, there's a saying, hurt people hurt people. That was something that I remember hearing a lot in certain circles. And, I'm learned that, if we don't start healing, we start hurting, not just ourselves, others, anyone that's within your near, in your environment.
Right. Well, you're right.
And that's what today I choose to heal. Today I choose, and it sucks sometimes. In the 12-step program, we talk about the onion, peeling the onion. The more you peel, the stinkier it gets. And there's a lot of layers. It's, for me, there's a lot of layers that I peel that stink. And sometimes I stay stuck because I don't want to confront them.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot underneath once we start looking, and once we get the courage to do that. So, yeah. So, well, okay, let's move from there, from feeling that, to see now about the conscious dance movement. What is that, and how did that help you to find a new purpose, right? And tell us about that energy and the structure of conscious dance, if people don't even know what that is. I mean, how does that facilitate healing and being vulnerable in a way that, when you were in that New York club scene, the difference there, it's a big difference. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, not to speak badly, right, of the club scene. It has its place, right? I'm going to speak from my experience. My experience in the club scene, I got caught up in the dark side of it, right? The drugs, the alcohol, the hookup culture, right? So that was my experience. The difference between what conscious dance is and just a regular club, right? Is intention, right? Club, you gotta, generally, right? You pay to get in. There could be alcohol, there could not be. There could be drugs, there could not be. But it's in the container, right? In conscious dance, or what what's more known as ecstatic dance. Um, we create a container. We invite people. There's no imposing. It's not like, when you go out to a club, the general rules are you got to get dressed up, you got to look, nice. Women got to look, nice, and the men got to be dressed up to impress the women, right? That was my experience, right? I'm not going to speak for anybody else, but that was my experience. So there was this dynamic that had to be kind of, that went in to that whole thing. And if you're not mature enough, it could lead you into not, into places where you go out of alignment. So the purpose of ecstatic dance or conscious dance is to connect, not only to connect with other people, but more to connect with yourself and what music means to you and how to connect with it without the use of drugs or alcohol or any mind-altering substances. That's really the purpose of that, right? It's the invitation is that you're sober, barefoot, outdoors, and that you come in with an open mind and heart, right? For women, it's generally, they don't have to wear heels, they don't have to wear a dress, they don't have to wear makeup, they don't have to do their hair, they don't have to do anything, they come as they are. For men, the few that do show up, right, and that's growing, is that they show up to not perform, to not have to feel like they have to impress anybody. That's my experience, right? Like that was my experience as a man. So the space is an invitation for both, men and women to be in a space where they just connect with themselves. They don't have to worry about who's dancing cool or who's got all the moves or who's going to hook up with me tonight. So it's an open invitation to experience the dance. It's 90 minutes. So, and we try to keep the container closed. So, the difference with that in a club is like in a club, it's open 6-8 hours, back in the day, I used to be in clubs 12 or 14 hours. We would have marathons all day and all night. I don't think, there's very few places like that now in the world. But there was a constant different, there's constantly different people coming in. So, when you're doing a conscious dance, you start a certain way, right? You want to do like either breath work or meditation or contact dancing. You want to get people comfortable with moving. You want to get people comfortable with their body before you start having them dance, right? Because a lot of people that come to these circles, they come from these, these environments where there's, where dancing has a certain connotation, right? Or you have to dance a certain way, or you have to look a certain way. And these circles are not for that. This is to be free. It's a freedom of expression. You want to dance, you want to jump around like a bonobo, or you want to stand there like the Statue of Liberty.
Right.
That's all welcome. It's not a, it's what you want it to be, not what everybody else wants it to be. And I think that's the difference between, what a club, what club culture is, right? Where it's like, everybody thinking the same, doing the same thing, dancing a certain way, dressing a certain way. Because that was my experience. I remember going out and having, the same, the baggy pants with the big boofy sneakers and I was a club kid, and that's what we, that was the culture. And it was about the drugs, what pill is here tonight that I could take, or how many I can take before I completely become a puddle. For me, the conscious dance movement got me loving again, got me loving myself, and got me back to, that little kid that used to dance in his living room.
Mm.
Like I was a dancer before I was, in the DJ scene, right? I mean, I love to dance. My mom used to dance. My mom used to go out. My mom was a, she was like a disco queen. She loved to
Oh,
dance. That was her thing. So I learned from her. I learned, and I listened to the music that she used to listen to. That inspired me. Um, you know, um, and in conscious dance reconnected me to that. And that's what I hope for the participants, for the dances that I lead, is that they connect to that inner child. Usually what also happens afterwards, right, which doesn't happen in club culture. I mean, back in the day, we used, well, in the UK, they call it back to mind. Um, Back in my day, I don't remember what we used to call it. We could call it the after hours, right? Because the after hours I spent in the club, like, you would spend, till 2 in the afternoon in a club. That was the after hours. And then we would go somewhere else after that. But, the UK called it back to mind. But in conscious dance, we do it in a form of, more like an indigenous practice where we form a circle and we do a sharing circle. And we talk about the experience that we just had for 90 minutes. And it's a great way for people to really share and connect on a different level that's not, drugs. I mean, like I said, I'll keep it on me, but that was a lot of my connection. Once I got clean, I didn't know anybody.
oh yeah.
It,
So you
it, it
had
was
to
like,
find new ways.
yeah, it's like, it was like everybody was speaking Japanese. I had no idea what was going on. I was like, how do I continue?
Right.
I
Well,
knew I loved the music. I knew I loved DJing, but I didn't have that outlet. And I took a break for a long time until I discovered, conscious dance and my mentor and teacher, Bernice. And yeah, I mean, it opened up so many new possibilities. It's unbelievable how that shifted my consciousness.
all right. So everybody listening, check out Conscience Dance and see how you can find a group to do that. And please subscribe to this channel. So Anthony, now you're spending time with men's groups to reclaim that healthier masculine version, to help men get back to that. Right. So, what about men that are coming from backgrounds of this machismo, this toughness and violence? Like, what's the most significant barrier to vulnerability that they face? And how do you teach them to build a safe, like a sense of safety within that group?
Yeah, so we don't really teach. What we do is, we lead, by example, and we inspire. Everything that we do in the circle is an invitation, right? The first and most difficult part is getting them there. That's that's the first step, right? Getting them there. Once they're there, it's about holding space for them and making them feel comfortable so that they can be vulnerable. For me, that was the biggest part, was a place where I felt brave to speak on certain topics that were, taboo all my life. So, so the first part is, yes, getting them there. Second part is, holding that space so that they can speak what's going on. Um, that's where I learned to really, that's where I really, my dad was a great role model, but it's in the men's circles that I really knew and understood, how to have a healthy, the healthy landscape of masculinity. where it was like, before was very, barreling through life like a, like a wild person, and not think about my actions had consequences, right? And how I was hurting others around me, including myself. It was in the men's circles that I started to see, okay, this is what this looks like in a healthy form. But I also wanted to speak on, we don't teach, right? It's not really that you teach. What I've learned through other methods of activism, right? Behavioral change, it generally works when someone comes to their own conclusion.
Mm.
And that's where I think, you know, therapy, as opposed to just gathering, right? Having like a group gathering and collectively getting together and acknowledging and listening. And then we use, sometimes we challenge, right? We do like a series of questions, right? Like somebody will come in and say, I'm afraid. Okay. Okay. What does that look like? Like we try to go deeper than just, because what'll happen for me is I'll stay at the surface because that's where I'm comfortable. I don't want to get into the muck.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in a circle with men, they want you to come, they want you out of that muck, but they're not going to drag you out. They're not gonna be like, no. Let's go through this together. And together we'll do it together. And that's something that is game changing for me. That's where it becomes a game changer. Because I live the life of people telling me what to do. Anyone can tell anybody what to do. Everybody's got an opinion about how people should live their life. And we don't want to do that because that generally doesn't work.
Right.
We want come to your own conclusion. Yes. Right. Even when you want, even in when you want somebody to do something good, right? We always want to try to control that narrative, and it generally doesn't work.
No.
I've learned that in the vegan, in the vegan, in the vegan activism space, we're promoting something good, but our methods could be flawed, and we could create even more of a problem if we don't bring that. That's what I believe. It's what's worked for me, is bring them to that conclusion by asking questions to see where they learn this behavior from and how we can bring them to the conclusion that it might not be in the best interest of everybody, including you, including the animal, including the planet. So I bring that into all my affairs.
Right. Well, no, you do. And so I see we're coming to the end of the time, but I wanted to ask you one thing. What is the greatest piece of advice you could give a man that might be watching that is just engulfed in like his worst mistake? He's just over and over and over about this mistake, and he's letting that define who he is, right? And he's stuck in the prison of that mistake and that identity in that mistake. What would you say to that man right now?
One of my favorite lines is, you can't win today's game with yesterday's scores. What's in the past is in the past. I found a new freedom in no longer playing the same narrative, the same story. I tend to get stuck in the story and dwell in it. And it's not until I change my story that I change my life. So for the men that this reaches, don't suffer in silence anymore. Look for local men's groups. If they don't exist, create one. Read the book Men's Circles by Francisco Fortunio and just start. The men's group that I do the most work with is Modern Renaissance Man. You could look them up as the MRM Official on Instagram, and they might have brothers in your area that might want to connect. If you're in Puerto Rico, there's a group called Soles Somos that's very consistent with their men's circles here, and they're based on the teachings of sacred sons. And me personally, I get a lot of my inspiration from my coach, Jose Alejandro. He's the founder of Modern Renaissance Man. And I get a lot of inspiration from the Good Men Project. And recently, and I'll close with this, recently I got asked to participate in a new project called Vegan Men Global. And I'm really excited about that because one of the challenges I face, right, being probably the only vegan man in the men's circle world, right, at least here, and now there's a collective globally of vegan men, and I can possibly bring my knowledge of men's work to vegan men, which we know have distinct challenges in their lives as opposed to, a traditional man. So, yeah.
That's great. Yes, yes, definitely check all that out. And then I have the Uncaged Circle, which is first and third Tuesdays, 7 Eastern Standard Time. That's 7 p.m. That's on Zoom. My website is Uncaged, www, the www part, right? What is it? I didn't even remember here. All right. Uncaged-heart.com. So I know I'm very, my mind is blown with this transformation and coming from your path and your journey and that immense support that now you are doing for others, Anthony. So I'm very grateful for hearing your story and your vulnerability and your courage and things that are not very, that's rare to find. So thank you so much for coming on this show. And where can people find you if they want to get a hold of you?
That's a good question. Yeah, they could follow my work at Casa Vegana .pr on Instagram. I don't do much in my personal page, but that's going to change as I get deeper and deeper into the work. But my personal page is Yo, Y-O, Soy, S-O-Y, Sintientes, S-I-N-T-I-E-N-T-E. And yeah, reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to assist in any way I can, helping, establish a men's circle, give any advice, any guidelines that I could. Yeah, that's it. And thank you. Thank you for allowing me to participate in this space.
Well, thank you so much. You'll have to come back in a few years or next year and we'll get an update on you. So really.
We'll make it a tradition.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thanks everyone for watching and we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.